So Kieran Murphy, I've known Kieran for 20 plus years probably.
When I first met,
sorry?
That was your first client.
So basically, when we first started Oxford Healthcare, which was the precursor to o2h, we needed to earn some money because we came out of another startup. I was like, what can we do to earn money? Let's do some consulting work. So basically, I found Kieran. I don't even know how I found Kieran, and he was CEO of a small startup called Apratech. And he says, I'll bring you in. You can help me write the business plan, whatever it was we were helping him do. And so Kieran was our very, very, very first client in Oxford Healthcare in 2003, probably 2003.
About that, I think,
22 years ago. And he's still talking to me today, which is, I think, fantastic. So he went on to do great things, which we'll hear about. He built Apratech up. He then went to another business. He sold it to GE. He became the CEO of GE Healthcare. Actually lives locally in Cambridge, Newmarket. And not many people know he exists in this ecosystem. So I thought it'd be great for you to hear from Kieran about his journey and what he's investing into as of today. Over to you. And
thank you.
It's very informal,
yeah.
So feel free to throw questions out, put your hands up, and I'll try to facilitate something.
Yeah, so I prefer to make this a chat as per ChaiTime. I was feeling sort of confident in myself as an investor and sort of and leader of companies and man to get exits, and then I met Peter Keen and I thought I'm way out of my depth field. So nice to see you, Peter, and it's great to be in this sort of company. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and have a chat. But just getting straight into it, look, I'm really a farmer from Cork who has stumbled through 40 years since I first arrived in the UK. I've had a few disasters along the way and a few things that work well. And I think it'd be just great to chat about what I think works well, what doesn't work so well, and what I like in the market right now and what I invest in personally. I invest in o2h as just so I can justify my beer. I've put some funds with Sunil, and we co-invest in a couple of things. Exonate and Qkind, I think, are the two that come to mind. And so I think they've worked pretty well. I'm very excited.
Them as well.
Good. So I'm going to take great comfort from that. And so we'll talk a little bit about why I like Qkind in particular. So at the moment I work, so I was CEO of GE Healthcare, which is a big business, but the reason I got that job was I had built a really wonderful life sciences tools business, which is now owned by Danaher. It's a business called Zentiva. And, I guess what we did was look at bioprocessing and cell and gene therapy workflows. And the basic principle was, we're in a piece of this workflow. Why don't we go upstream and downstream of where we are and build out a tool set for that workflow? And it sort of worked. I went to run GE Healthcare, and then we sold that business to Danaher for 21 billion, which was too cheap, actually, but it was a great business. And so I've been in, I think we put some amusing title on this called For the Love of Tools, which was not meant to be misinterpreted like Sunil did. But the reason I like the tool space generally is it's really an enabling technology to allow all of the work that you guys do in laboratories. And what we try to do is really understand workflow. And, if I were to put a mission statement on myself, I would say I try to understand workflows, and I try to understand what's going to unlock productivity, because I still see a massive opportunity or problem statement on the productivity of going from the bench and going from the discovery stage through process development and into manufacture. And every time I go to work on that, we seem to stumble upon things that make that easier, make it more productive, and we can make good margins. When we started doing all this back in 2012, well, when I started doing it back in 2012, a lot of good people had laid the foundations before I arrived. But when we started doing acquisitions to try and fill out workflows, multiples were cheap. we were buying businesses at 12 times EBITDA, putting them into our business, in classic GE style, I guess. We had a very simple philosophy, which was get revenues up, get costs down, expand margins, make sure we squeeze out cash. And, we just kept doing that over and over again. And hence we ended up with an enterprise just in the tool space of around 5 billion, making 40% plus EBITDA margins.
Are you thinking purely financially making an acquisition? You're like, multiple is this, I can get multiple MG of this, and we integrate it.
No, because we weren't sellers. This was something I was adding to our portfolio for the business, and people probably won't believe when I say this, but what I always thought then, and I still think now, is if we just try and think 10 years ahead or 15 years ahead on what's going to really be important in workflows like cell and gene therapy, like autologous cell therapy, what's really going to how is that going to evolve, and how do we get from where we are now, a cumbersome workflow, to something that's a lot more slick? And where I'm thinking right now is how we can apply AI and machine learning to that space, because it's very poorly used there right now. So to be honest with you, I have always seen the financials as an outcome, but when you work for a house like GE or a private equity firm, unless you translate what you're doing into some sort of projection of here's how I'm going to create value, and not just in some sort of dreamy, I'm playing into a TAM of 3 billion or 5 billion. Say no, I can see a direct path to getting revenues of 40 to 50 million with that piece of toolkit, and I know that we can make in that space, we can make gross margins between 55 and 70% if we run the business properly. And so these are all rules of thumb. It doesn't always work that way. But when we started in the cell and gene space in 2012, I think we were, our gross margins were 25 to 30%. And that's the benefit of working in somewhere like a GE or a Danaher. The discipline in teams is always around margin expansion, and margin expansion, comes by usually to some extent you have to get scale.
One thing about Kieran is like, I thought I was good at business development, selling stuff, and then I met Kieran, and like he's a whole new level. So if anyone could write the book, The Art of the Deal, it would be, you're always it's an amazing, that is your key strength of yours. That was like what really impressed me about, you back then in 2003 even. Do you think as in GE, that was, the strength that you were able to go and acquire, you were able to, and also the second question would be, because a lot of our portfolio are talking to bigger companies about deals.
Yeah.
If you put an offer on the table of say 50 million, do you have in your mind, actually I've got 100 million to do this?
Well, it honestly, it really depends. And I have been somebody who, I've overpaid, I've put too much money on the table for these. It just depends on how badly I need something, like it happens in the rest of our lives. But, I have some, I would say I have some good examples of I'll talk about my best deal ever. Why not? We always had a vision within the GE Biopharma business that everybody was working at grand scale. And I do remember being working back in Novartis in 2000, and say, we need to build a vaccine plant. And I say, well, it's $300 million. This is in 2000, $300 million in 3 years. And I think to myself, I can't get my head around that. Like, I was young back then. I think, it must be an easier way. And so I've always, when we got into the bioprocessing business, thought we need to put a factory in a box. We called it factory in a box. And so the technology that allowed us to do that was a business in Boston called Accelerex. And, this is a classic situation that you've all seen over and over again. Accelerix comes up for sale. They have 50 million in revenue, no profit. Gross margins were sort of a work of fiction, and they wanted 300 million for the business. We paid a fraction of 300 million for the business, but we just kept grinding. We showed immense patience in doing that deal, and the patience paid off. We integrated. It took us like 3 years to integrate that properly. But one of my proudest moments was in 2016. We constructed a factory for Pfizer in Hangzhou in China for a price of about $70 million. Of typical Pfizer, I mean, they spent hundreds of millions on things around the place that were less important. But we put a factory on the site for 70 million, and that had been built in I think it was about 15 container crates in Germany and shipped into Hangzhou. And from the day those containers arrived on site, it took 9 days to put the factory together. And for me, that represented like a real victory, because that's disruption, and I was really pleased with that. And of course, every time we sold a factory, the actual Accelerix kit itself was about $10 to $15 million, depending on the configuration, but it was $20 million a year in consumables. And so the real trick was, as soon as they're hooked on that, we supplied all the connection, all the bags, all the stuff in single use that you guys are very familiar with. And so I think the model of the story there is, I just, and looking at businesses that I'm with right now, or working with right now, I work for EQT and Advent and KKR and Warburg Pincus, and everything we're looking at, I'm blue in the face really from trying to say to the investors, just be a little bit more patient, think on a slightly longer term horizon, and really think about how we can make a step change in the inflection point by just scaling what we have. And most of that is organic work. And, I'm speaking for too long already, but I generally think about
so you're investing in just get a little bit on the startup stuff. So we both invested into Qkine,
right?
Us from the fund, and you actually as well personally. Yeah. Why did you invest in Qkine? What is it about that business that you like?
So the reason I love the tool space generally is the time to market is relatively short compared to a drug. The hurdles are all around quality, getting customer acceptance, getting customer trial. And once you get that wheel turning, I mean, Catherine Elton, who's the CEO of Qkine, I'm a huge fan. And it's one of the reasons I invested. I think she's wonderful. But when I saw her in her office, the metrics she was able to quote to me on, my customer satisfaction is 90%, my customer retention rate's 90-odd%. She's making very nice margins. And so it's just, and a full-scale cytokine library is probably about 100 cytokines. And from a standing start, she basically put 50 cytokines in her library. And so now it's just market expansion. So this latest round of investing has just been, see more customers, see more deals, win more deals, get the right people on the ground. Because in a business like that, and it's like Abcam Light, I guess, in some respects, it can be a web-based business. The opportunity to expand revenues at really attractive margins and have a very sticky customer base and repeat business is extremely good, and that's why I like it. The problem is we've put between us all about $1 million or $1.2 million into it. It's not enough, and in reality, to really scale, she should have raised really between 5 and 10 million. And personally, I'd have put in a lot more if she was doing that, because you know, here is the simple reality of a business like that. She can get the revenues of that business to 25 to 30 million within, I would say, 2 to 3 years. That can be 10 million of EBITDA. And if she has the right growth trajectory, the multiple on that EBITDA can be up to 30 times.
The follow-on question is, why does she not raise that money? Is it because it's like UK mindset compared to what you're doing in the US, or is it what is the, you know, because she's obviously capable, you know.
Very capable. It's UK. I think it's UK mindset, and so one of my frustrations, and those of you, I embarrassed myself on a panel a couple of weeks ago on all this. The UK managers and CEOs do not spend enough time thinking about how this can scale. And generally speaking, this is a great generalization, of course. What I see in boards of directors is just a lack of courage to say, to really understand what the inflection points in value are going to be, really understand what it's going to take to scale revenue and scale the production behind that. And they get constrained by crazy things like the CapEx. You know, don't worry about CapEx, because if you can get the revenues to the right level and you can sell at the right gross margin, what you have to remember is, in a business like this, I used to be in this situation buying for GE and buying for P. We really look at gross margin more than anything else. And because between gross margin and EBITDA, I can basically control everything else. Sorry.
So, do you ever buy companies without revenues?
Personally, no. And, you know, so that's why I talk about.
In all the time you've been acquiring, never really looked at any.
No. No, and I realize that's terrible in a. I invest in Nextnet because you told me to.
But you tend to prove you sort of.
No, I'm sort of sick and tired of investing in dreams, and I get to the second to top slide, and if I see one more time the total addressable market for this autoimmune application is, and I just think, I just want to see how you're going to get your first. Just show me the first set of milestones and how you're running your business to hit each of those milestones. And you do get spoiled when, you know, this is stuff I learned at GE primarily, actually, because you just learn how am I going to grind out a set of results. Because in a place like that, telling people that everything's going to be fine in 10 years gets you sacked. You just have to deliver short term. But the people who do well in a place like GE have a very clear sense of direction of where they want to take their business. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I think in the time Jeff Immelt was running GE, I'd never had an acquisition turned away. We went and we spent, you know, we did $1 billion+ deals and never got rejected, because it said, space is good, you're thinking solid, we can see exactly how this is going to create value. The challenge was we were paying by then 15 times EBITDA for businesses when they could buy energy businesses for 8. And that did not bring the most polite bit out of me, because I said, keep buying energy businesses and you're going to end up in trouble, which is kind of what happened a little bit. But anyway, sorry, I'm still rattling on too much.
Any other questions?
There's a lesson from what you've just described there, Kieran, and that is there's this perception that in the device tool space it's lower risk from an investor perspective. It isn't. And the reason it isn't is because you have to finance the business through that revenue phase. You have to establish an infrastructure And for those that have been there, guess what? You want to establish an infrastructure in the US. Sorry, you can't do it on Virgin Air flights, going backwards and forwards and having a service office. It's got to be real. And so you actually have to provide capital for just as long, if not longer. And by the way, you still have the same regulatory risk in many of the circumstances.
You do.
It's wonderful illusion that I had 20 years ago. Medical devices, you can get your product. You don't have the same time frame to market.
Yeah.
It's a good discussion. I mean, obviously we're pro-therapeutics and people do make lots of money doing it. And there are complications with devices and tools as well. But I think having a balanced portfolio is what we do. Is the way to do it. And we see a lot of our therapy. And in the UK, we have such a good kind of intellectual property ecosystem of biotech stuff. And if you can advance those, you're competing on a global footprint. You don't file IP just for the UK, you're filing intellectual property on a global footprint. Suddenly you're competing with that Boston biotech, who's raise a lot more money, but you're doing it at a much lower cost base and a more sensitive valuation. So I think pros and cons and having a balanced portfolio is right. I think
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
We're moving on. Thanks for that, Kieran.